Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, Data Security and Privacy 101. My name is Stina Boge. I'm the Global Brand and Communication Manager in It's Learning, and I'm here with our expert, Daniel Manne, Security Officer at It's Learning. As you know, GDPR and security rules and regulations are complex and constantly evolving, and schools face a unique set of challenges in meeting these standards. With limited resources, a shortage of specialized knowledge, and a need to balance data privacy and security with the day-to-day demands of education, achieving compliance can often feel overwhelming. Today, Daniel will guide us through essential practices in data protection, the specific obligations that schools must meet, and how you can collaborate with suppliers to ensure compliance. He'll cover everything from understanding the regulations that apply to your school to practical strategies for reducing the risk of fines and protecting student data. By the end of this session, we hope you'll have a clearer understanding of how to safeguard your school's data, meet legal requirements, and prepare confidently for your next audit. Please ask any questions in the questions tab and not the chat so that we're able to pick them up. We'll try and cover some of these at the end of the webinar. And please also keep in mind that the questions should be general and not country specific, as we have many nationalities on this call. So thank you for joining today. I'm going to hand you over to Daniel now. Let's get started.
Thanks for the introduction, Stina. So, who am I? My name is Daniel Manne. I have worked in the industry with IT operation and compliance for 30 years. Today, I am the lead manager for It's Learning's ISO 27001 certification and responsible for GDPR compliance. As you will notice throughout the webinar, I am not a lawyer, so my approach is a little bit more practical than theoretical. So, let's begin. Why is this topic so important for school owners? Schools are the data controller, which means that you own the personal data used in the applications, like It's Learning. We, as a supplier, are responsible towards you, but not directly to the data authorities. The auditor will ask you for compliance. So it's the school owner's job to ensure that the solution used are compliant. For those of you who haven't been in an audit, there's not much need to worry. The auditors are generally supportive and aim to help everyone to maintain good practices. The data authorities prioritize the privacy of the data you manage, which is why they focus on you as a controller, not us as a processor. During an audit, the key is for you to have a clear understanding of GDPR compliance requirements and to demonstrate a genuine effort to meet them. However, if they find that you are not compliant with GDPR regulations, they may fine you up to 4% of your total revenue. Similarly, the upcoming legislation for security in EU, NIS2, can also fine you based on your total revenues, but only up to 2%. This may sound small, but in a recent case from Ireland, LinkedIn was fined 310 million euros or $335 million for processing data without an appropriate legal basis. We will probably not see these kinds of numbers in the school sector, but we have seen an increase in cases towards schools. Most of these cases do not end in fines, but in expressing criticism and issuing orders for the schools to comply. So let's start with the agenda for today. We will look briefly at the changing landscapes in schools and what is important for schools regarding privacy. We will also go through what it takes to be compliant to GDPR and how we as a supplier can help you in this. And we will also look a little bit on other legislations that will affect schools. And in the end, we will open for questions. So let's step back a little bit first. The classroom has changed during the last 30 years from using chalkboards as primary learning tool to digital platforms and introducing new challenges in privacy and security. If we go back to the old days, privacy and security was simple. Everything was on paper and we had no digital aid in the schools. This meant that the teachers were the data controller in the classroom, and the security, well, that was the locker in the teacher room. Fast forwarding to present times, the classroom has been digitalized and the internet is now an integrated part of the school. This presents us with new problems for data security and privacy. And to help us, EU has passed several new legislations like GDPR, NIS2, the European Accessibility Act or the EAA, and the AI Act. I will mainly focus on GDPR and a little bit on NIS2 in this webinar. But the Accessibility Act and the AI Act will also affect schools in the upcoming years. But why then do we need all these new legislations? To answer that, we need to look at what the new threats for the schools are. With the digitalization of the classroom got commercialized. New actors came into the classroom, and not everyone had only the best interest of the student in mind. With access to student information, companies were able to profile students and could use this information for their own interests, like, for example, targeted ads and such. This was one of the GDPR primary goals, to prevent such misuse of data. Under GDPR, the Data Processing Agreement, or the DPA, defines what suppliers can and cannot do with the data. This also requires suppliers to prioritize the security and privacy of this data. In the It's Learning DPA, for instance, we cannot do anything without or with the user data without the customer's explicit consent. But even if companies only have good intentions, if the company does not take privacy and security in their application seriously, the data may be misused by others. For instance, it may be that the application does not shield the personal data good enough between the users, or that the application is easily hacked. And in today's environment, we have all heard about ransomware. These actors are not targeting schools, they are targeting bad security, and which can be found everywhere. So, what does it actually mean to be compliant? Well, there are 99 articles in GDPR, but I think these are the ones that are the most important if you get into an audit. You need to have appointed a data protection officer, or a so-called DPO. The DPO monitors compliance, advises the school on data protection obligations, and acts as a point of contact for the supervisory authorities and data subjects. This ensures someone is always responsible for managing data protection. DPIA, or schools are usually required to conduct a data protection impact assessment, or DPIA, to identify and minimize privacy risks associated with their data processing activities. I will come back to this part in the following slides. Processing overview, or records of processing activities. GDPR mandates that schools maintain a record of processing activities outlining what data is collected, how it's used, and who has access to it. This documentation ensures transparency and accountability, allowing schools to demonstrate compliance and have a clear view of their data landscape. Within this, it's important to understand what personal data is being processed and why. Schools also need to determine the lawful basis for each type of data processing, whether it's consent, legal obligation, or another basis under GDPR. I will also come back to this part later on. You also need to perform regular self-audits. GDPR requires schools to regularly review their data practices to ensure ongoing compliance. This involves periodic self-audits to verify that all procedures, security measures, and documentations are up to date and compliant with GDPR standards. Transparency on data subject rights. This means that the school must inform data subjects, like students, parents, staff, and such, about how their data is processed. This is usually done through privacy notices and includes informing them about their right to access, rectification, erasure, and the data portability. Then it comes to maintaining data security. This is a very important point. Schools need to make sure that their solutions are secure and are designed with data protection by design and default. Then we come also to the data breach notification. In order to comply, you need to have processes in place to notify the authority if and when a data breach occurs. If a breach occurs, the school is responsible to notify the data authority within 72 hours. And it's also important to understand that even if the break-in happens at one of their processors, it is the controller of the school that is responsible for notifying the data authorities. And lastly, we also have one of the most important ones, staff training and awareness. Privacy cannot be achieved if staff members do not know how to achieve it. Regular training ensures this. So, but can't we just get an audit or a certification that can fix all of this? Well, unfortunately, there are no universal stamp of approval for complying to GDPR. The only official audit are from the data authority in your country, and they don't hand out certificates for compliance. They only do audits if they think something is not correct. So there are no official certification issued by EU that can show that you comply to GDPR. However, GDPR encourages member states to set up a local certification, but very few has done this. One possible reason for this is that this certification will be specific for each country and therefore hold limited value outside their borders. Several companies, though, offers independent GDPR audits, which may help you towards compliance, but these are not certified. The closest thing to a GDPR certification is probably the ISO 27701 certification. ISO 27701 is a standard for managing personal identifiable information within an organization and is an extension of ISO 27001 to include guidelines for privacy. But GDPR requires you to do regular self-audits, and these should be done at least yearly. To find templates for these, there are numerous of them on the internet. So, how can your suppliers help you with GDPR compliance? Well, there are some documents that are mandatory, like the DPIA. The Data Processing Agreement outlines how personal data are being processed between the school and the supplier. Even though most people think that this is a boring document, read it. It is important for understanding how things work between you and your supplier. Your supplier should also have an outline of what security and organizational measures that they have for protecting your data. This is important to know when you're doing a DPIA. Then there are documentations and information that you are responsible for having, like the DPIA. The DPIA is probably one of the more important documents that you have in GDPR. It gives you an overview of how data is treated and a risk assessment of anything going wrong. Much of the DPIAs or the information in a DPIA are the same for all our customers. That is why we have decided to make a DPIA template that is 80% pre-filled with information from us. You only need to do the remaining 20%, and of course, you need to review all the answers so that it fits you. This is your responsibility. The processing overview is also a document that outlines what data you are sharing with your vendor or supplier and how it's used. We will also make a version of this document that you can look on. Then we also have mentioned also here ISO 27001 certification. The ISO 27001 certification, which is an international standard for managing information security, where you provide a framework for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving an organization's information security management. Is a very good standard to have for suppliers and all other companies also. It ensures that you are taking security seriously in all levels in the company. So let's look a little bit on the DPIA that we have made. This is the first part of our DPIA, where we have made a systematic description of processing activities and questions surrounding its learning. Many of the answers here are vital to know for conducting a risk assessment of its learning. On many of the questions, we have not filled in an answer, but we have either filled in help information or we have supplied with guidance from its learning. This is because you are responsible for this document and you need to own the answers. So it's important that you read our guidance and then use this to make the answer yourself. In the DPIA, we also have DPIA risks. This part is part of a non-exhaustive list of risks for use of its learning LMS that its learning has identified as being relevant from a school's perspective. Some risks here have been pre-filled, and some of them have been left blank. On the pre-filled, we have assessed what we think the risk value is. And on the blank risks, or risks without a risk value, we think that we are not able to assess the risk, or that you are the one that should be assessing the risk. We have also included what existing mitigations are for these and what potential mitigations might be. Our risk assessment might not be correct for your school, so you must review all of the risks from your perspective and use your values and feel that these values are correct for you. Remember, you are the owner of the risks, not us. We also have the records of processing activities, which is part of Article 30. The records should contain the purpose of the processing being done. Descriptions of categories of data subjects and the categories of personal data. Also, the categories of recipients to whom the personal data have been or will be disclosed to. And also what lawful basis is used for the processing, and where possible, the envisioned time limits for erasure of the different categories of data. And lastly, also a general description of technical and organizational security measures as referred to in Article 32. So the DPIA here. Remember that the DPIA of its learning is your responsibility. We have pre-filled many answers, but you need to go through them yourself and change things so it fits your schools and your risks. If you ask for a copy of our DPIA, you will get the DPIA with the risk overview and also the processing protocol or records of processing. We want these documents to be as good as possible, so feedbacks are very, very welcome. And to get a copy or clarification or ask questions or anything, please send mail here at privacy@itslearning.com. Then we're going slightly over to the NIS2 legislation. NIS2 has been called the GDPR legislation for security. And for some reasons, many companies think that this is none of their concern. First time when I looked at NIS2, I also thought that we didn't have to care about NIS2. But if you read this through, one will notice that it applies to a lot of sectors and also to schools. Not necessarily all schools, but the majority of schools. Schools, especially higher education, or for the first part, schools are part of public administration, or it can also be classified as a digital infrastructure. So if a school or educational institution is of a certain scale, also, particularly large university or school networks that span regions or countries, their reliance on digital system and the potential impact of a cyber incident could trigger the requirement of NIS2. So, if a municipality or a county is the data controller for the school, then you have a school network and you will probably be affected. And a cyber attack would disrupt critical services like student information systems, LMSs, and other communication in the school. So, well, what does it take to be compliant? If you already are GDPR compliant, you have done most of the work. But there are some additions. You need to conduct risk assessments. This is much like the risk assessment in GDPR, but the risk should be security focused and not privacy focused. You need to implement security measures, and in this to implement security measure means establishing safeguards to protect networks and information system from cyber threats. This includes actions like risk assessment, access control, incident response, data encryption, regular monitoring, and security awareness training to ensure resilience against cyber incidents. This is much the same as in Article 32 in GDPR. Implement appropriate technical and organizational measures. The only difference is that you are thinking of the whole network or system, not only on personal data. And you need to ensure that you are monitoring all of the network in the system. You must monitor the network and system for signs of intrusion and other irregularities. Designated person that are responsible. This is much the same as a DPO, where he or she is responsible for reporting incidents to the authorities. And one final thing, in this too, the board or the managing body or the board of directors is not good, is not defined properly, but the board, the managing body or board of directors, they may be held personally liable for failures to adopt and comply to NIS2. And on the end here, NIS2 builds on ISO 27001. So if you are ISO 27001 certified, or if you already use an ISMS, you don't have to do much to be compliant, since everything is built upon the ISO 27001 certification. So, in summary, remember, you are the data controller and ultimately responsible for the data. And when you're dealing with your suppliers, it's always better to ask too much than too little. Another takeaway is also that the data authorities have warned that they will become much stricter in enforcing compliance to GDPR in the coming years. And when you're thinking about security is something that you can look at tomorrow, remember that hackers are not looking for cool companies when they hack. They are looking for those that doesn't take security seriously. So to sum it up, ensure that your suppliers are security and privacy focused. And as we at Digital Learning says, is ISO 27001 certification is a good starting point, since we also are ISO 27001 certified. So I would like to say thank you, and we can probably open for questions.
Thank you, Daniel. I think this was a great overview of what schools need to consider and organizations need to consider. And we've had quite a few questions coming up throughout this presentation. A lot of them are related to the DPIA. So I think, let's ask, are schools responsible for filling out a DPA per supplier? Is that their responsibility?
The, well, the schools are, or not necessarily the school are responsible for doing the DPIA, but the school owner. So that could be the municipality and so on. Do you need to do it for all your applications? No, you don't need to do it for all your applications. You need to evaluate each and every one to see what kind of data are processed and if the processing are likely to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of persons. If we look at its learning, why do you need a DPIA on its learning? It's mostly because its learning as an LMS is doing evaluations and scorings, which may be called profiling or predicting, and it's have aspects concerning the data subject's performance. And it also can be used for tracking behavior and so. So that's why we will need it on its learning. There are no standards DPIA. Unfortunately, there are no standard in DPIAs, but there is a lot of templates available. We have used one from University of Science of Technology in Norway as our template.
And that's another question connecting to this. So from an external customer, they're asking, can we ask for this DPIA that's pre-filled by us earning 80%, so we can use this for our process? And that's the whole purpose of us pre-filling this DPIA.
Yeah. That's the main purpose of us doing this, because I think a lot of schools and a lot of municipalities have a lot of applications where they actually need to do DPIAs, and they won't have enough time to do this because it's a lot of work to be doing it. So I think probably there are customers that haven't done the DPIA on us. So our thought is by providing this, we are trying to answer all the questions that every customer have, and that so that you can just do the part that is your part, or what's specifically for you. But as said before, remember, you need to own the document. It's not we that own the document. It's it's you need to own it.
It's basically pre-filled with the information that we think that they should ask us to be
Yeah,
compliant. Mm.
yeah.
So we have another question that is in regards to SaaS applications in general. And I'll read it out to you because I think some of these documents will cover this. But it says, with SaaS applications, you do not have control on the logging and monitoring processes provided by the company of the product. How do you then provide an auditor with this information?
Well, if you get into an audit with on this, I would probably say that the easiest would be to talk directly to its learning, to say that we are going into an audit. We need someone to be available if we get a question on this, so that this could be delivered out if needed.
And that's
So
in regard to any supplier, they would have that.
yeah, that would be for any supplier that they have, that they should talk directly to the suppliers and say we are going into yeah, an audit with the data authorities, and we need to have this in place.
There's also a question again connected to the DPIA, whether or not, if can someone ask for this before a contractual agreement with this learning, the DPIA? Can they ask to have a look at it?
Yeah, yeah. I would say so. What we are, the main thing about the DPIA of how that we are doing now is that we have, this is a new work from us that we're providing out to you now. So we want, in the start now, we want to look a little bit more to be sure that we are having all the questions answered, and that it's that it's the quality that we want it to be. So that's why now in the start we want to have a little bit more control on how it's provided out to you. But in the long run, we probably will make this available free for everyone.
There's another question, and I'm not sure we can answer that, but there's a question regarding if there are any database of organizations that have been fined due to GDPR or NIS2. And I think there might be on a local level, Daniel,
Are there any database?
of organizations. So can you find a list somewhere of organizations that have been fined due to GDPR or NIS2?
Oh, there is a lot of uh, uh, there are a lot of places to look up on this. I get what do you call? I'm on several email lists where I get up every week. These are the new finds that has been that have been issues. I just on top of my head, I don't remember every one of these now, or
But
any one of them now. But it's there are several places that tries uh, to get the information from all the different data authorities in Europe, and they're looking at what's interested. And I think it's I don't DPIA hub or something or GDPR hub. Don't quite remember.
there's
Uh,
someone that has added a link to the questions here, enforcementtracker.com. So that might be a tip. I know
yeah,
that the at least the Norwegian regulatory organization posts their rulings. So, you can probably follow that per country as well, depending on where you're based. So we're getting to the end of this webinar. They're posting and they're popping up new questions, and I think this is a topic that's interesting for a lot of people. But what we'll do is that we have recorded this and we'll send it to those of you who have registered. And we have time for one last question, and that's kind of a general question. So we've talked about GDPR for years now, but why is it especially important in schools?
Well, I would probably want to reverse the question. What happens if we don't care about the privacy? And if we don't care about the privacy to students, all their data are up for use by companies, for example, like Google. And with all the big companies coming in, and when we start looking on marketing cookies and such, there are so much tracking of what you're doing on the internet, and we don't want this part. We really don't want this to be the thing that when you're going to school, what happens is that all the companies are tracking your kids. So we have to have a way to refuse them companies to profile our kids in a way.
I think also as a supplier in this industry, we have a responsibility, right? Because we're dealing with children's data and they are specially protected. So we as a supplier should be conscious of our responsibility in this area, and you should ask your suppliers to do the same. So I think we'll end there, Daniel. I want to thank you all for listening and for engaging and sending us questions. The email address was privacy@itslearning.com if you have any questions related to this or the DPIA or the work that we're doing on security. And we will, of course, send you this presentation at the end of the webinar. So thank you all for taking the time today.